Thank you for being with us this morning, and thank you for joining us to How to Monetize Your Data webinar. I think we can just get started. Okay. So first things first, let's see some housekeeping items to take into account. During the session, we are going to keep our cameras and microphones off. And we also invite you to share your questions in the Q&A box. We will address them, all of them, or at least most of them, depending on time, at the end of the webinar. So let me introduce you our speaker. So today, Brent Hill is joining us as the speaker for this webinar. And from NASCAR to Time Warner Cable, all his way to Wizeline, Brent is an experienced engineering leader who leads Wizeline Tech organization in Asia. Brent, thank you for being our speaker this morning, and I'll let you take the lead from here.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for introducing me and setting up this webinar. First, I want to welcome everybody and go over what we're going to cover so everyone knows they're in the right place and is going to get what they want out of their time. So we're going to go over four main goals and topics. We're going to talk about how you can use data to improve business performance and drive revenue, which is what we mean by monetizing your data. We're going to talk about data maturity, which is the internal capabilities your company is going to need in order to monetize data. We're going to talk about and give you some suggestions about the skills you need to bring inside of your organization to execute on these plans. And then we're just going to wrap things up by helping you get started. Okay. So the general agenda here is we'll talk a little bit about Wizeline, we'll talk about how the monetization works. We'll tell you how to evaluate your position as a company. We'll tell you about how to identify opportunities, things you can look at inside of your company, specific topics to identify that may help you find ways forward. We'll talk again about building a data practice, who you should hire, what those skills look like, the way forward, and then the next steps in Q&A. Okay, so first let's introduce Wizeline. Wizeline is a software development and design services company. We have operations around the world, particularly in the Americas, but also in Europe and Spain, and out here in APAC, in Vietnam, Thailand, and Australia, and probably more in the future as we keep growing. We're really passionate about data. We've done a number of data projects for some very large companies, especially in the Americas, and we've seen tremendous impact from those. And we really want to help other companies achieve that sort of success. And we partner with them to get them from end to end across their goals. Whatever skills they need to bring in-house or whatever they're missing, we can help them with that. So let's dive in. How does data monetization work? Well, it works like this, indirectly. You don't sell the data that you have helps you sell. Or if we're in like logistics or something, it helps you ship. That's the point. It goes in directly. So in companies, data remains mostly untapped. So even as recent as last year, the Harvard Business Review put out a study where most companies, 69%, have not created a data-driven organization. They do not have the skills to use the data, even the data they have, effectively. And even more, don't have a data culture. So even if they don't have a data organization, you could still hire some skills into your existing company and try to make it work, but most haven't even done that. So there's a huge amount of potential in all industries to be more data-driven. And there's a couple different areas that you can look at to help quickly monetize your data, just broad categories. The first is internal operations. So you can use data to make things more efficient, find internal bottlenecks, remove manual processes, things like that. You can use data for personalization and segmentation for marketing. This is especially true for B2C companies. This is extremely effective and usually low-hanging fruit, where you can productize, you can direct your product offerings to just the right people at the right time and improve conversion rates. And last, indirectly, you can improve profitability and churn. So if you're using data to, say, improve a product, you'll have lower churn because it'll be better for your customers, so you can use that to improve usability. You can also use it to tweak your product or your funnels to convert better directly by just tweaking the funnel, even if it's not personalized. and that'll increase profitability directly. So again, there's a lot of ways you could do that, but it all involves data. So how are you going to do this? So there's a general process, and we're going to go into more detail in the future with specific examples, but in the broad strokes, you need to do three things. First is you need to identify internal opportunities. Look for the low-hanging fruit, things that your company probably already has data about but has not leveraged. And then you need to evaluate your capacity to use that data and create some empowerment for your teams and some space to use it. And then once you've identified some opportunities, you need to focus your efforts. One of the things that a lot of companies do is they try to do too much, too quick, and they just don't have the skills, the energy, and the focus. Other things come up. So instead of trying to solve 10 business problems, just solve one or two. Be very focused, pick your best opportunities, and then devote resources to just those until it's done. And then use that as lessons learned to iterate and expand. So that's piece three. Or once you've done one data project and a couple of experiments and learned something, not just about data, but your own organization and how it interacts with data and how it collects data, you can use that to build on those successes and get some momentum inside the company to drive further improvements. So let's talk about this in a little bit more detail. You want to evaluate these business problems and understand where you are with your data maturity. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but basically, where do you have the most data or the least data? If you have no data, it's very easy to improve things by just starting to record things and making some educated guesses about what you record. So it's very easy to have some success. On the other hand, if it's a higher data maturity thing, where you have some real opportunities, then maybe you have enough data to actually directly drive results more quickly. So either way works. So if you have good data maturity, that works. And then you want to have a time-boxed experiment. You take what you have and you design an experiment that will have an outcome. Now, this outcome doesn't always mean that you immediately make more money. Most of the time, it just means that you learn. For most companies, there's a process where you have to go through a couple iterations of learning how to record data, how to deal with the data, how to store the data, how to interpret the data before you start having substantial impact. But that doesn't always happen. Some companies get there very fast. But once you've done these experiments, then you're in a real place to do a data capability project where you have enough understanding of your company and your data to build something more substantial and long lasting. And then that's where you get some real upgrades to your business's capability to solve problems using data. Now, overarching all of this is there's a really important distinction that everyone in these projects needs to understand, and it's often missed. And that is the difference between descriptive models, which many companies already have, and predictive models. So a descriptive model would be something like a traffic report or a sales report, a report of a current headcount. And those are all useful to know where you stand. But the power of data is not to tell you where you are, it's where you could be in the future and help guide you to getting there. So you want to move from descriptive models and descriptions of the data in your company to predictive models. Models that help your company predict the future. So instead of saying, what is our traffic today? You want to be able to say, hey, if we ran these ads, this is what our traffic would be in a week or a month. And then you can start seeing, well, what's the most efficient way of running these ads? Or how do we get the most traffic per dollar? And those are predictions. But you can only get those high quality predictions by building these predictive models. So it's really important to start thinking about this and thinking about whether a report or a model that you generate is one that just describes the current view of reality or one that can be upgraded to tell you where you'll be in a month or 6 months or something like that. And even if it's not perfect, it's still very helpful as long as you check it for accuracy. So let's kind of go back into some specific examples for customer segmentation. If you're using Google Analytics, which many companies are, you already have a lot of data available. Especially if you're B2C, you may have a lot of traffic. So this gives you a lot of opportunities to monetize your data by doing better segmentation. You can use Google Analytics data, break things down by country, gender, age, product interest, psychographics. You can add custom data to Google Analytics, and you can combine Google Analytics with, say, your own analytics package to track certain things or user accounts. And that will allow you to gain insights about your customer base. And that's relatively low-hanging fruit. Another thing that would be a good project to start with is process analysis. So if you have a sales funnel that involves again, maybe something online, but then once a sale happens, it goes internally. You have to go all the way from packaging your product to shipping it or something like that. You can measure how long each of those steps take, how many hands it have to go through, how many manual processes, how many times is there a chance for data to go wrong, and how often does it go wrong? How often do you have a wrong address or wrong order number or wrong total sales volume, something like that. And then by improving those data processes, you directly will improve your process because it will become more automated and more accurate. And that will improve your profitability just directly. So that's another good project. And the last one is product analysis. And this one's a little bit harder unless your product is online, but you can do this by looking at how people interact with your website and your product, and what are they looking for? What's their customer journey? And are they spending a lot of time looking for something or getting frustrated and leaving? And by tweaking your website and your whole offering, you can improve those numbers and those metrics, depending on what your product is. And that will directly result in lower churn and higher throughput for your product and for your customers. And then you can figure out how to monetize that better. So those are 3 good examples just to get your mind churning about what might be appropriate to your organization and your products and your market. So let's talk about a case study. This is a product that we helped with as Wizeline. We had a major multinational media company that came to us, and they wanted to consolidate visitor data into a single management platform. So they had data in different places, and they wanted to build a single tool that would help them with their ads business, to use all that data to drive more efficient advertising. And so and do better segmentation, all the things we talked about, pretty much all 3. So we spent some time with them. We did a lot of investigation, and we built this platform. We took their user profiles, we used machine learning, we segmented things, and then we used those segments to help adjust ad auction data and to know which ads to buy for the lower costs. Okay, it took about 18 months with a small team, but the revenue impact was significant. It looks like about 20%. So we have a project that results in a 20% increase in revenue, which for a large company is a substantial sum of money. So that's the impact that you can have. So a good data project that combines all these elements is something that could be transformative to your company's bottom line. Everyone wants to go to their board and say, yeah, we did this project and it had a 20% increase in our entire company's revenue, right? So I'm sure you would love to be able to go tell your boss or your board that this is what your project has done, and it has for some of these companies. So let's talk about how you get there. The first step is to evaluate your current position, looking at where you are so you can figure out where you can go. So there's a couple levels of data maturity. There are 5 levels. We're going to talk about all 5. The first is ad hoc data. So when you're looking inside your division or your company, whatever your scope of control is, ad hoc data means that the data that you collect is not really well thought out. It may not be collected consistently. And even if it is collected, it's usually just inside your department or your team, and it is not really spread. There's not a clear data model. There's not a direction to it. And obviously this is pretty hard to utilize, especially across the organization. The next level up is tactical. So at that point, you start thinking about data a little bit, and at least at the departmental level, and it's probably a little bit more consistent, but it's mostly descriptive. It's not going to help you make predictions, but at least you know where you are, right? And that's usually what drives it. There's somebody who's in management who's like, I don't know what's going on. We need to have better models of our day-to-day. So they build out a descriptive model to help them with their tactical maneuverings for that part of the business. But it still isn't very helpful at being strongly predictive. It's that when you get to level 3, where you've now normalized the data enough and you can share it across different parts of the organization, that you can begin to make a more consistent data model for entire processes, because those entire processes almost inevitably involve different pieces of your company. And that model allows you to start thinking about predictive developments in analytics using data. The next level up is level 4, it's differentiating. At that point, your company believes in data, and it's across many, if not most divisions. They share data, they know how to collect that data. They have a consistent tool like a data warehouse or data lake that they can push data into that can be utilized for insights. And the executives and leaders of that company are in a position through analytics to use that data in real time or close to real time to evaluate how things are going and to make course corrections. So if ad costs have suddenly gone too high, they can take action to reduce spend or figure out what's going on. And that data is predictive. They can also say, well, you know what, if we spend an extra $100,000 this month, we're gonna have this much more throughput and this much sales. Is it worth it? You know, they can actually make that call and make it pretty accurately. And that helps drive better business outcomes. And the next level is innovative. And there are very few companies who've gone this far right now, where they've not only got the data tooling in place, but that data tooling is constantly being improved and uses tools on top of that data to automate refinement. So there are companies out there that, for instance, when they're evaluating customer journey, like Facebook, they're making thousands of small experiments, and they can automate many of those experiments to see which way of interacting with the customer, which piece of their product should be optimized to improve some metric that they've identified drives their business. And this way, they can also take reports of all these tests and say, wow, you know, when we did all these A/B tests with our customers, we saw this interesting pattern. And because they're running so many experiments, they get this extra higher level of metadata, and they can say, you know what, I think there might be a pattern to all these A/B tests and why they work better. So let's try this. Let's try this new attempt at our product, or this new offering, because I think there are users who want something that we never thought about. And then they can drive a new business line or a new offering and innovate. Okay, so let's talk about aspects of data maturity. And this is a lot of knowledge and a lot of information. I know there's 9 things on this slide, but these are all the different aspects of where you can have data maturity. So on top of those 5 levels of maturity, there are different aspects of maturity. We're not going to go deep into all of them. We will be sending out these slides later in a recording so you can like read this and spend more time on it. But in broad strokes, there's the ability to have strategic choices, right? Where are you going, and make insights about your customers and goals. There's functional capacity, like I said, optimizing how efficiently you get things done. There's the ability of your organization to think about data, just internal skills. There's your technology, your ability to add new data and new metrics as time goes on and as you learn more. You know, some organizations can add new capabilities very fast. Their technology is very strong. They're ready to go. They have a good team. Other ones, it's really hard. They're just not in that place. And there's their data architecture, which is related, which is even if you add data to the or pull more data from your technology platform, do you know how to organize it and store it well? And then you have your processes. If you've stored that data, how do you get that data into something usable? How do you get that into your analytics system? How do you put that analytics in front of the right people? There's a lot of thought that goes into that, especially if your organization is very large and complex. And there's budgeting and finance, all of these pieces. The warehousing, the skills, the architecture, all your processes, all of these have financial impacts for building them out, operating them, and so on. So how do you make sure that this all ties in to your finance system and generates ROI? Because that's also important. Maybe you have 5 different data projects. How do you know which one's most valuable? How do you measure that? So that's a whole nother level. And then once you've collected all this data, you have another issue, which is you need to be able to manage the security and access to that data, because it's the lifeblood of your company. So data governance is really critical, and security is very critical. So there's those levels of capability. And then finally, there's just KPI tracking. You can do all of this, but if you don't tie it back into the correct indicators and know that those indicators are driven and up to date with data, then you're not going to have the impact you want. So you need to have all of these working together. So let's talk about some much simpler ways of evaluating your data maturity. If you have a company where you have a lot of dashboards, all sorts of data dashboards, tons of graphs, tons of metrics, every division has their own, then that's not the greatest, right? That shows lower data maturity, because it's unlikely that all those dashboards say the same thing the same way and are based on the same data. And then you don't know what's accurate. If you have 5 different dashboards telling you about the same sort of thing and they all give you different numbers, even if those numbers are pretty close, you don't really know what's going on, which of these is accurate. And if something changes, or maybe they change in different directions, one goes up and one goes down, what does that mean? So that's not good, right? That shows lower data maturity, like level 1 or level 2 probably, at best level 3. Good is a couple of very high quality dashboards that everyone in the company trusts. You may not have a lot of data, but the data you have, you believe in, and it's useful and it's up to date. And that shows very high data maturity, and that even if it's not across all aspects of your company, you've learned how to do it once, which is really the important part, getting that one good example. Okay, reports. Reports are another good indicator of your data maturity level. If you have a lot of people in your company doing manual reports, that's not ideal. It's error prone, slow. It's very, very common still in this day that there are people who spend tons of time pouring through Excel spreadsheets to build a report, to send it via email to someone in the company. So all of that can be improved by just using data to automatically drive those reports. You collect the data automatically with some code, assemble it into some slides, and automatically send the email to people on the mailing list. You could just do that. And that alone would increase the quality and efficiency of your data abilities. So you want to have automated alerting and reporting. So once you have the reporting automated, that's also where you can easily add some intelligence where if, say, sales are way up or way down, you send an alert to investigate that something's off. And just not having to wait for someone to go through all that number crunching manually and all that time and lag, which could be weeks, shows higher data maturity. And it's an easy low-hanging fruit for some companies. So let's talk about a case study where we did some of this. This was done in APAC. There was a major Asian media company that wanted to create a B2B offering to add value to their customers using data. And we worked with them using agile product development practices. We tried to come up with the best MVP we could. We worked with them to go to market with this. We collaborated with their analytics and data science teams. We provided some of our own, and we built all this on the cloud. We'll talk about that in a little bit on Google Cloud. And this generated new revenue. It created new insights for both that company and their clients. And they're now using this to make a lot of new database decisions, and they're continuing to expand on this platform. So they considered it a huge success, improving their data capability, and the value they got out from the strategic side for decision making has made them double down, and they continue to work with us, and we continue to improve this product and their other data offerings. So let's talk about identifying opportunities for you. You've got two options when you're doing your first experiments. You can look for low data maturity or high data maturity inside of your company to decide which sort of experiment you want to do to improve your capabilities. Now, for some companies, they want to choose low data maturity because it's really likely that you're going to get an improvement. You just probably won't know what that improvement is. If you improve your metrics, what are the side effects? Maybe you know, maybe you don't. It's harder to tell. And you also don't know why your data is low quality. There may be all sorts of improvements you discover just doing the project, but they may not be ones you can predict in advance. It also tends to disturb the status quo a bit more. If your company is low data maturity, all of this change, moving things to the cloud, data-driven decision-making, automating all these things, it takes new skills. And it may not be comfortable for some organizations, especially if they're very traditional. So that you need to get a lot of buy-in. On the other hand, you have the option of looking for aspects of your company that already have relatively high data maturity and pushing them to the next level. There's a lot clearer vision just because of the existing data of what your potential outcomes may be. And it provides a good case study for the rest of the business because the impacts are more predictable. They're a lot easier to sell. But it also takes a lot higher capability inside of your company. Every level of data maturity takes a substantial increase in your capabilities, especially your technical capabilities and the skills inside of your company. Moving from like a level 2 to a level 3 of data maturity is tough. Moving from 3 to 4 is tougher, and moving from 4 to 5 is very hard. That's why very few companies have done it. It requires a real dedication to excellence and a very strong technical skills. So when you're doing this, we have an example proposal. After you get this recording, you can use this to just write up an example for your company about what you should do. So given the name of your business case, just the different verticals involved, all the different actors and positions that may need to touch this data so that they can all be trained up. What are the drivers? What are the impacts? What are the KPIs that are going to be impacted by this data project? And what would be the effect on the customer lifecycle and the story of the data? how is this going to affect the business, and what will be the new story, for hopeful story, right? And remember, this is an experiment. You're trying to move in this direction. And especially if it's a low data maturity situation, these outcomes may be unknown. So you may want to put that in the story, right? And this is just to help build alignment, because the biggest barrier to most data projects is not technical skills, because we can provide those and you can find those, but organizational alignment, clarity on what it's going to take, who needs to be involved, and the outcomes that you need to achieve, so that everyone who needs to be on board is. And you just need to identify all that up front and make sure that there is enough sponsorship to achieve those goals. The next thing is to do a technology evaluation. What are your data sources that you have already? Who creates them? How accurate are they? How do you ingest this data? Is it manually entered? Because that won't scale. So you may have a project right there. How do you automate it? Once you have this data, how do you store it? Because what happens with these data projects is the amount of data that you end up storing goes up dramatically. And every level of maturity, it tends to go up even more dramatically. So very quickly, you end up with terabytes of data. Thankfully, data storage these days is quite cheap, but you still have to figure out how to get it in there. How do you make sure your data is clean and regular? Data that's very dirty, that's irregular and doesn't come together, really limits your abilities to use it. And one of the common things you do with data projects is you have a piece of that pipeline that helps clean and regularize your data. And then very quickly, you run into data governance. Who's in charge of storing that data? Which role is responsible for making sure that only the right people can access it? And how do you ensure that? So that could be a technical governance, but that can also be internal, like processes governance. You need to start putting that in place. And then once you have the data, you need to start figuring out who can do the analysis. So you don't have to wait for that to get started. You can go ahead and start building out this technology before you have someone to do the analysis. But you need to know that by the time you get there, that there'll be someone available to help have the proper skills and get the data into a place that's actionable accurately. So let me give you a couple of examples that are industry specific, that are things that you could think about. So if you're in fintech or e-commerce or something like that, where you're more likely to be B2C, fraud detection is a huge opportunity that has a direct impact on your bottom line. If you can detect fraudulent orders, fraudulent transactions more accurately using your data, then that's going to save your company a tremendous sum of money. We talked about this before, customer segmentation and targeting. How do you advertise the right products? Be they financial products to shoes? It doesn't matter what industry you're in, really. This is always valuable if you're using any sort of sales to end customers. And then predictive churn reduction. So one of the things that's very valuable for those sorts of companies is to look at customer behavior and identify who's likely to churn. So someone comes, they interact with your company for a while, and then they start to drift. They interact less and less. How can you predict who those people are and see that pattern of behavior and reach out to them and give them a coupon or a special offer or a phone call or anything to pull them back into the fold and retain that customer, so you don't have to spend more on customer acquisition costs? So again, direct effect on bottom line by reducing churn. Logistics is a huge industry right now, where we're seeing more and more data being used to improve the company. This is something that a lot of people don't realize is a really good place for data and analytics, because it seems so physical and non-digital, because you're moving things physically from one place to another, but that's not the case. There's a tremendous amount of money savings in carrier and route optimization. We worked with some companies on this, and it was tremendous, the impact on their bottom line. So you want to use location tracking and machine learning to optimize delivery routes and driver allocations. And then related to that is inventory location optimization, making sure that you have the right objects in your warehouses or storerooms or factories or whatever, so that you have just the right amount of those objects or those pieces to be used by that company, and then not too many. Because if you have too many, then you're just wasting space and storage costs. And if you have not enough in another location, you end up overbuying or overshipping or waiting on delays as these things get moved between locations. And then, like Wizeline, you might be in the professional services industry. And here you can do solution automation. So you can look at common problems that your customers may have and start working on automating those solutions. And just having the skills to drive that automation is enough, but also putting together tools that are like off the shelf that you can say, hey, we can customize this for you and get this done. And the one that we use internally is lead evaluation and discovery. You can use data mining and analysis to evaluate potential new leads or new industries that may need your services. And I'll talk about that in a bit. And in healthcare, this is just exploding. You can use predictive care and screening. So you can use big data to proactively reach out to patients, schedule checkups, automate hospital bookings. Drug discovery is one of the ones that's being used. I know in America, they're looking at this where they run a bunch of existing drugs through machine learning, and they use machine learning and AI to predict new chemical formulas. And then they can try those out, and they'll come up with things that humans maybe have never considered. And then medical imaging and discovery, this has been going on for a while, where they use machine learning and they use visual machine learning to look at different patient records and like x-rays or ultrasounds and things like that to detect diseases. And then this lowers the workload on doctors because it provides an automated second opinion. So just tremendous applicability if you have enough data. You can use that to lower costs, improve efficiency, automate things all over the place. So here's an example in professional services. This is an actual internal Wizeline project. This is ours. We created a project called Agro, and it scans the internet for job postings, and it categorizes them into different groups. And we can see the key programming skills that people are looking for, what region they're in, the name of those companies, how many people they're hiring, and so on. And we use this to predict demand. So if we see a huge surge in, say, Golang, we know that we need to bring on more Golang engineers because people are going to come to us saying, we can't find enough Golang engineers. We need them. And we can start training them up. And we're continuing to refine this project, but it's already been very predictive of where we're going to see demand. If we see a huge spike in one language, that means people are going to start knocking on our door. So we practice what we preach, and we've seen impact from these projects, and they've been very effective for us. And we are doubling down on that and scaling up some of our projects internally to help us drive business with data as a professional services organization. So what are the final outcomes and outputs that you want from all this? You want to have, if you're sketching this out, and we'll go over again in the next steps piece, you want to have automated answers to key business problems if you can get there. You definitely want to have improved internal data skill sets. No matter how the project goes, no matter how your experiments go, you need to take on a learning mindset because your whole organization needs to learn to work with data better to be competitive going into the future. That is the most important outcome, the ability for your company to have better skill sets to drive these data projects and use data effectively in the future. And then ideally internal case studies that you can use to advocate for improved skill sets across the company, to do more projects, to get more buy-in that this is worth doing and that this is of value and this is something your company can achieve. And then you just want to have those as artifacts, things that you can share, the process, follow-ups, lessons learned, anything you can to help these projects scale and other parts of your company use them. So let's talk about building a data practice. So we can help with any part of this, but there's a couple things you need to do. There's like four pieces. The first is your assets, the actual data you have, the infrastructure you have. Do you have an internal IT infrastructure? Do you have your own servers? Are you already in the cloud? What sort of capabilities do you have internally? Do you have them at all? Do you have anyone who's worked with data? Maybe, maybe not. And then when you have all that together, we can work on transforming your business. So the first thing I think almost every company needs to do is adopt a cloud approach. Why is this? The cloud, any of the cloud providers, Amazon, Google, Azure, all the clouds provide a scalable platform. As I said before, when you start these data projects, the amount of data you store and process and deal with goes up dramatically. And these cloud providers not only provide an easy and relatively inexpensive way to store data, but they come with a lot of tools for analyzing it. Amazon has QuickSight, Google has the Google BigQuery and Google Data Studio, and so on. So when you get your data into the cloud, you have easy and inexpensive access to a bunch of business intelligence tools immediately for free, basically, on top of your data storage costs. So it makes things much quicker and easier for getting the right skills in, and then you can hire for those platforms. And then they also have a lot of built-in security. So because they have a lot of skill at building out these scalable platforms, it's known how to secure them. They have known security practices. And as a result of all this, there's just a lower cost of ownership overall, and there's a lot more ability to scale, which is going to be one of the big barriers. So you want to start with interviews, workshops, your internal team. You want to start doing data modeling. What is your data supposed to look like? And this is things your team will need. So you need people who can come in and do data modeling. You do your proof of concept for your data structure, and then you bring in the data engineering, data science, and business intelligence people, and then they can work for your product development. There are 4 skills that you're going to want to build internally or have some access to one way or the other. The first one, again, is cloud technology and cloud security. Before you have that, it's going to be harder to bring other people on. It's going to be very slow and painful to scale up. So go ahead and start working towards moving towards the cloud. Pick a cloud, whatever makes sense for your business. We can help you evaluate, but start moving there. The second is data engineers. So data engineers do the heavy lifting of connecting all your internal systems and directing the data from your internal systems, like your ERP, finance, whatever, website, Google Analytics, into a common data repository, data lake, data warehouse, or set of data warehouses, whatever makes sense for your business. And that's just a tremendous amount of work. People often underestimate the amount of effort it takes to move all that data into a clean, consistent format for analysis. Then you need data scientists or data analytics people. And they try to extract insight and value from that data. And the ability of them to do that extraction, to get data, really depends on the quality of the data you have from the data engineers and its thoroughness. So that's why that's the next step. And then, of course, their own skill, figuring out what analysis needs to be done. And then finally, once you have that analysis, once you can do that, you need people who are good at data visualization. And they may be, and often are, the same people, but it is a somewhat different skill set. So the data scientists extract insights from that data, but then you need to get them into the right hands. You need to put them in the right people in a format that they can easily understand, instantly grasp, and then take action. So that's its own kind of usability skill set for data visualization. These are the 4 skills you want in that order, because there's nothing to visualize and it doesn't matter. So just start down that road of building out cloud technology, data engineering, then data science, analytics, and visualization. Now, this is a little bit technical, but I want to give this view to you, again, because you can look at it later. This is often what a good data setup looks like. So there's multiple data sources as your foundation. Your different internal systems, maybe social network, so if you're like B2C, right, what people are saying about you, any of this stuff. Then the next level up is you have data ingestion. So you're pulling from these data sources and you're pushing them, as you see to the left, on a data repository. And then you have data processing systems that look at that data repository, they enrich the data, they manipulate it and put it into a system that is easier to do analysis on, and they put that back into a data repository. So you have the data repository that has your raw data, and then another piece of that data repository has this processed data, and that processed data is used by the data analysis team. And they pull that data that's been processed and enriched and normalized, and they do the processing, they do all the analytics, they trigger any alerts or reporting that you may need, like something's going wrong or there's something that's urgent, right? And they do that analysis and they restore that analysis ready to go. And then you have the data visualization that pulls again from the data repository that's nice and clean and been analyzed. And that gives you your graphs, your tables, your visualization, and so on. And then that gets pumped into all of your different applications. You might reduce CapEx, OpEx. You may use it to push marketing, whatever. Now, wrapping all of that on the right, as you can see, is your data governance. How do you keep that data private, secure? How do you keep in legal compliance, depending on industry you're in. Like if you're in healthcare, there are tremendous regulations in most countries about how you store and deal with that data. And then as you can see in the middle, you'll see batch, real-time, and streaming. And these are different ways of doing these processes. So some data you only get, like say monthly billables. You have a bunch of clients that send you bills at the end of the month. So you're not processing those in real time. You just have this huge batch of data that you need to do once a month. Whereas other things like customer visits may be more real time or streaming. There's constant changes all the time that you need to react to. So your data engineering team is going to evaluate this and figure out the best way of processing this data and to keep your costs low. Because a lot of times it may be cheaper to do it in a batch than it might be real time or streaming, and easier as well. So you just need to evaluate the different approaches of doing this whole process. So I'll leave this, this is for you to look at later, but I just wanted to go over it and you can ask questions at the end. Okay, so let's talk about next steps. I know this was a whole lot to cover in a very, very short webinar, but we'll talk about next steps for you. So again, let's review. You want to do three things. You want to identify your opportunities, your low-hanging fruit, be they low or high data maturity. And you want to investigate your internal capability and alignment for making changes, especially if it's a low maturity situation. You may need a lot of alignment. It may be very threatening or very difficult or very just odd for the team. And you want to create a sense of empowerment and possibility in these teams so that you can get this done. And then again, to not spread things too wide, you want to focus your efforts. Get a couple of wins in by just focusing on the best possible problems to be solved by data that you have in your organization. Just one or two, and focus on running an experiment where the goal is, more than anything else, learning, growing as an organization, with the business outcomes being an expected outcome, but not setting the expectation that the very first time you do some small data experiment, it has some explosive effect. That tends to take time. As I showed in some of the case studies, those were 18-month projects, and those projects involved multiple iterations, right? So don't think that you're gonna do this in like 2 months and then everything's gonna go amazing, right? Like, you need to practice. So focus your efforts, get a couple of wins, learn, and then iterate and expand and build on that success and keep building the skills internally. And as you're building those skills, look for opportunities to take your descriptive models and turn them into predictive models, because that's where the real value lies. And that's part of how you learn where you need to improve your data collection or improve your data skills to take things that are just a description and make them predictive. A lot of times you'll learn so much just in that, just what you need to collect. There's one key piece of data a lot of times that you're just not collecting, and that changes the value of everything. And it's maybe trivial to add, but it's the linchpin, the thing that makes everything possible. So this, just looking for this movement from descriptive to predictive will make a huge impact for your company, okay? Consider your data maturity level. Document this if you need to. Are you ad hoc? Is it tactical? Is it like a tight group? Is it consistent? Are you able to pass data around between different divisions of your company and have them all agree that it means the same thing or not? Are you at a place where the company uses data to drive their decision making, or even sections of the company if it's a large one? And are you using that data to drive new business insights or even new product lines? So just understand what's possible and figure out where your company wants to be and where, and you can use that. Won't go through all these 9 again. You'll be able to see this in the recording, but when you evaluate that capacity, think about all 9 of these aspects, about your business strategy, your internal functional capacity, your capacity to evaluate that data, store it, process it, govern it, connect it to finance, and so on. Really think that through. It's even worth kind of labeling all of these 1 to 5 and drawing all this out, just to really know where you stand. And then last, let's give you the top 5 takeaways. Just the easiest ways to get started. The first is move to the cloud. Start moving as much as you can to cloud-based data storage and data processing options. Even for your IT applications and web applications, things like that. If you move them to the cloud and you handle them in the cloud versus say your internal data, in like internal servers or something, you get access to all these cloud technologies that enable easier data collection, easier data storage, and easier data analysis. And then, of course, it's easier to bring in people with that expertise because those are well-known cloud technologies. And then evaluate and document your key business cases and data maturity, so you can find that low-hanging fruit. And just know where you stand so that you can also track your project progress. Evaluate your organization's internal skills and capacity for change. Make plans to build those skills or hire them. Create a set of predictive experiments that can answer your key business questions, and then start running them. And then finally, measure results, right? So just 5 things to do. Move to the cloud, document your key business cases, figure out your internal capacity for change, find the best fit for that situation that you have, and then start running experiments to show results, measure those results, and keep moving forward. Okay, so that was a lot to go over. It's time for some Q&A. So I will pass this over to Brindley and Leslie.
Great, thank you, Brent. So we have this question: which tools do you recommend for recording data from internal operations?
That really depends on the nature of the internal operations. So I don't know if we can get some follow-up on that. If it's something like spreadsheets or things like that, that can be really difficult. One thing that you could do if it's really internal like that, like there is sometimes, is moving to things like Google Sheets. So one of the things that is not appreciated by Google Sheets and these other web-based replacements for even something like a spreadsheet is that they have APIs that can be used and programmed to trigger updates. So for instance, here at Wizeline, we have a couple spreadsheets that are usable by teams that are just used to Excel, but because they're in the cloud, when they edit those spreadsheets, it triggers a little piece of code that sends an update to our cloud-based data collection software, and then that permeates into our data lakes and so on. Same thing with our Salesforce, that data gets pushed into our data lake, and we're able to use that to drive insights. So depending on your platform and what you have internally, those specific tools will be different. So can we get a little bit more detail possibly? I'm not sure if we can.
Nancy, if you could share maybe in the chat some additional details, that will be great. In the meantime, we can address the next one, which is, what do you recommend to do to start with an organization that is just kicking off their data journey?
Sure. So like I said before, if you're not already in the cloud, you're going to want to move to the cloud for your hosting, just because there are a lot of tools that are very useful in all these cloud platforms to help with your data. For instance, I've recently been working a lot with Google Cloud, and they have things like Google's PubSub that it can be used both for your application architecture, but can also be used to automatically drop things into a data warehouse. So every time an event happens, like say a checkout on a web page, you may emit an event saying this user checked out with this cart. And maybe that message goes to your checkout system and ships them a package. But you can also listen to it from somewhere else in the system and go ahead and write that to the data warehouse. And the nice thing about that and those sorts of tools is that the engineer who's busy writing this code to emit this signal doesn't have to worry about the data warehouse. They just say, this event happened. And then another team can know that those events exist and they can deal with that warehousing code later. And they can make sure that the data model fits later. You know, it doesn't have to all be done at once. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is to start thinking about what experiments you want to run and what are the key aspects of your business that you need to automate and understand. So if you're a business-to-business company, you may really care about uptime or what causes failures or what are the key questions you end up getting or how many customer reach outs you get, right? If a business customer is confused or their internal team is bothered by, say, your product, your digital product or something, how often does that happen and why? And can you install, say, some software on your platform to do heat maps or other data collection about how they actually interact with your product? If you're business to consumer, there's an awful lot of things like Google Analytics that you can use to drive like customer funnels. So, you know, X thousand people land on your website. How many of them click to the next page? How many of them check out? How many of them click contact us? So on, right? And you can map that, and then you can start adjusting that. But it's important to start collecting data immediately so that you have a historical record so you can see what changes happened. So even if you're not taking action on it today, if you are able to take note of what's going on, even though it's just descriptive right now and not yet predictive, if you can get a description of what people do now and then you make a change, say changing a key page on your site, like for marketing or for sales or a contact page, right? How many people convert? How many people move to the next stage? How many people land on this page that has a button to say contact us and actually click it? And then you move the button. Did it go up or down? What percentage? That'll tell you about how to better design your page at least, you know, and then you're still collecting that historical data so that you can get an idea of traffic and things like that. So I hope I answered the question. It was very broad, but there's always things to do. And the main thing is, you know, using the cloud technologies and just starting with data collection, whatever tools you can find. There are so many.
We have some other questions in the queue, but we are running out of time. So I think that's it. It's been great information. Thank you, Bren, for being with us today. And thank you to all our attendees for joining us. So see you in the next event and stay tuned for more Wizeline events. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it.